Hello, everyone. I am here to talk about design's potential in none other than Bed-Stuy. So it's a continuing theme here. The foundation of my thesis is very much rooted in Harvard sociologist Robert Putnam and his theory that American civil society is in a decline. And specifically, he talks about this decline in terms of social capital. So it's the intangible good in a neighborhood. It's the intangible relationships between people that carry weight, whether it's the conversations at the dog park or at the post office or the conversations on the subway platform, and that collectively these relationships carry weight and are the backbone of society. So in choosing the context of where to study social capital, I'm looking at Bed-Stuy because that's where I live. Specifically, I live here. The Myrtle Willoughby subway station is at that corner. There's public housing here and here. Actually, there are 13 NYCHA housings in Bed-Stuy alone, and I specifically chose a small 4-block radius so that I could aim and target some of the scale and the impact that I was trying to create. And as Laura mentioned in talking about Bed-Stuy, it is a space of ripe possibility. I'm defining it as a fragmented urban neighborhood. There's diversity, there's gentrification. The median household or average household income is 47% lower than the city average. And in placing myself here, I'm very aware that I myself am the white, affluent, educated, yuppie, hipster, whatever person coming in, and that my role often has been that of outsider and intruder. And I want to see how the different characters that make up Bed-Stuy, how they can come together and build social capital. So my big question is, how can design be the catalyst for trust and reciprocity in this neighborhood? And some of the foundational theory for me has been the theory of weak ties, that it's actually the casual relationships that we have with each other that build stronger practical effects for us. And likewise, sort of just the essence of Jane Jacobs and her celebration of the quirkiness of city life, and that it's the bits and pieces, and it's the life we live outside of our homes and on the sidewalk, and this ballet on the sidewalk, that's a really provocative place and a place ripe for potential for my project. So in deciding where to target what I wanted to do, I was looking at what is design's role possibly in the community, and I see it as we think about park benches and parks and festivals. I wanted to take on a more nuanced approach of what could I in one semester impact and bring to a community. So initially off the bat, I was doing some things completely in the public space, engaging with people and leaving things out. It became very clear that it's confrontational and uncomfortable, often for me and the other person, to create a conversation without anything as an instigation. And then I went into a cafe for an event, but that too, although it created permission for engagement, it was not comprehensive enough to reach the neighborhood. So what I found is that I wanted sort of the middle ground, that I liked the welcomeness of a cafe, but that I wanted it to be somewhat in public space. And I was talking with a bunch of cafe and shop owners in my neighborhood, and they were the ones that were most aligned with what I was trying to do, because they too want to be welcome and include people in their process. So my initial objectives for this thesis: I wanted this to be inclusive, that this is for the neighborhood, so I didn't want it to be too targeted or inside. I did very much wanted to be able to implement it during the semester and know that it could continue on and that I wouldn't leave something unfinished or I wouldn't make false promises. And that this idea of the third place, the cafe, that's not home and that's not work, was critical to me. I also drew inspiration from a bunch of precedents because I wanted to create an object or an artifact to be this instigator of change. And I like Candy Chang's work, that she creates something that's pleasant and aesthetic, and it has standing and grounding in the public space. I liked the idea of infrastructure becoming playful. this is in India, this is a public refrigerator. The idea of public sharing in the neighborhood was compelling. Likewise, the laundromat project in Bed-Stuy, where it layers teaching of skills and arts during the laundromat experience. So it's that, how do I add something to a routine that already exists? So these were the 3 cafes and shops I was talking to, and it was Willoughby General that immediately was the most willing to jump on something and try it out. So again, I live here, and at the end of the street is Willoughby General, and I pass it every time on my way to the subway. And I decided to create a little free library and see what was the potential in that becoming a platform for creating social capital. And my theory of change is that if the neighborhood was entrusted with caring for an artifact that lived outside at all hours, and if they respected it and treated it well, could that be an indicator or a prompt for trust and reciprocity in the neighborhood? So I tested it out by just creating a crate of books. And immediately people were adding books. I was talking to people that I don't normally speak to because the crate was this sort of gateway or an allowance to speak to people. Books were being left outside of the shop at nighttime hours. And on the Instagram for the shop, people were getting excited about it. The building process then, I was like, all right, now I can make an actual little free library. And constructing it myself was tedious because I'm not experienced in this. But once the process hit the sidewalk, it became much more participatory. And people were helping out and engaging, and neighbors were driving me places. And it was just really great to see that already just the process of making could be collaborative. And already I was meeting people and making friends that I had not before this project. More buzz on Instagram. One that I like a lot is I fell in love with this place in Bed-Stuy even more today by stopping by. I installed a tiny camera inside of the library. It was Issa's camera, and so this captures some of the people that were stopping by the library. So this demonstrated that the little free library model works, and to a degree I already knew that because it is a nationwide initiative, but bringing it to Bed-Stuy in an urban environment, that's where I wanted to test it, because when talking to people about this idea, they're like, there's no way this will work, or one cafe still to this day says, no, that's going to create loitering, it's going to create bad behavior, we don't want that. So how can design specifically come in to really push that trust and reciprocity? So I added various components to the library. One of them are stickers on the spines of the book to sort of brand the library and distinguish it as this is a place of intention, and that what you're participating in is curated and you're part of this experience, and we're valuing the books, and maybe you can value them and your neighbors in turn. I added bookplates to the books, again, to brand them of where they were from, but also to engage in questions of what do you like about Bed-Stuy? What is neighborliness to you? What can we share? In thinking about what else we could share, tools kept popping in my mind, but you don't want to put a power drill in a library. So I created a call to action on something that was the shape of a book. And again, this generated buzz. And I'm using buzz because there's excitement and engagement, but not necessarily action that follows that. So I created a URL for a Google Doc, and no one has actually engaged with that to register or ask for a tool. What has worked is I installed a chalkboard, and this has allowed passive communication for people. And this passivity is intentional because, again, the confrontation on the sidewalk is unnatural, and what I'm creating here through this design is more a nuanced approach of a pleasant piece of infrastructure in your neighborhood that does add small amounts of value in your day. And it's also become a platform for experimentation. I burned a couple copies of the new Beyonce Lemonade album and put it in the little library, and twice now it has been taken and then returned. So the fact that people see it as something borrowing and then coming back is pretty cool. And especially exciting for me is that someone put up a petition to add speed bumps to the street in front of the library, and that it's getting signatures. So this is becoming a totem or a place in the community where people are seeing as a place of value. More pictures of how I was being engaged. On Facebook, I posted to a Bed-Stuy open group, and it got a lot of comments. One such, a principal from a school in the area has emailed me. She wants to talk about a literacy event that is happening. On the negative side, we also have, it is impossible to read, but she says, "I don't think anybody gives a poot about your little stupid library." And I private messaged her on Facebook, and she did not respond. But it is showing that this is not a magical thing, of course. And then another thing that has spawned from this is that we've created another library. The garden a block down got it approved to build a library. One of the gardeners is a carpenter. He whipped up a library in a weekend. And then I brought it to the sidewalk and started painting it and sort of Huck Finned some neighbor boys to help me. People were talking about it, engaging. This man from the laundromat helped me with my drill because it wasn't working well. So it shows, again, that the potential that a seed can be sown, literally, in a garden. So where do I take this? One possibility is, to look to the physical manifestations of this. That maybe my current library, I can add a passport type of stamp or other sorts of things, but it, to me, seems more bells and whistlesy and gratuitous, and I don't think that's the direction that this should go. I could also think about what else could be shared. Could it be about food sharing if you could make it socially acceptable, or about clothing sharing? Or what if technology leveraged more of the neighborhood hub element with information and communication between people? But what I see is my particular role as a designer, that what I can best do with this project is to sort of educate and animate, that I could, physically create a guide for other communities that want to do this, or I could act as the consultant or advisor. I think that I have expertise to bring, but so much in what I was trying to do here is that it doesn't require someone with expertise or design skills to do, that I can help illuminate it, but that it's really critical that there be ownership on behalf of everyone that's creating this, that I don't think I could go to a neighborhood where I don't reside and have the same effects. And in looking at this matrix about social design, this project for me started as an individual product. And as I worked, as more people became part of the process, the product shifted here, and then as it started to amplify a bit within the system and people began to learn about it, and as it grew in physicality to the garden, I see myself going in these directions, and I see that the sharing of that knowledge helps make that possible. Okay, and I will just conclude with this slide as the main design criteria that I brought to the project.
In the context of maybe like reimagining social capital, to what extent do you think that this platform will be taken over by gentrifiers? Or perhaps if that was a measurement instead of...
Yep. When I was talking to the guy who built the second library, one of the first words he used is, "Oh, you're gentrifying the block with this." And there is an aspect of that, but I don't think you have to equate adding value as gentrifying. But in looking at who uses it, like if you just take the snapshots alone, there's more of the tiny camera, that takes a picture every 60 seconds. So a 60th of the day, that slice of time shows that it is used more by white people in that case. But I've relied heavily on the two owners of the store because they have become the shepherds of this box, and they're the ones that have, I walk past it every day, but they give me updates and they talk about who's stopping by and who asks them questions. And from their perspective, it's a diverse group of people. But this could also be seen in light as an instigator of gentrification.
To build off of this and to go back to your comment about how one of the shop owners you approached rejected it as bringing on loitering, have you been able to identify the qualities of a willing participant, maybe rank them on, like I'm thinking the ones who are saying no because gentrification, or no because sort of the opposite, like it brings on too much of the undesirables?
The cafe that said, no, this will never work, they're actually a nonprofit cafe whose mission is to change Bed-Stuy one block at a time. And they hire at-risk youth to be the baristas. And they're like, oh, we know the neighborhood, we know how it goes. No way that anyone's going to respect or value this. So they see it as a temptation, and they don't trust their neighbors to treat it correctly. And that was sentiment I heard from multiple people, and the fact that it's still standing 2 months later. There have been moments where like all the books have been taken, and that does hurt because, you know, if that had happened in the first week, you're like, okay, so yeah, people aren't going to respect what's out in public. But then when people have been respecting it and then it gets taken away all at once, you feel it more. And even neighbors have stopped by the shop to say like, where did all the books go? Like, did someone take them? So it is, people are giving evidence that they care about the structure.
Who put the books back? Do you restock the books?
I probably supplied 5 initially. The store that I partnered with, they actually had books on a shelf inside, but no one was ever using them because you would have to go inside and know that they exist. But it's been almost entirely just community generated, that people have been stocking it themselves with a pretty steady flow of inventory.
Could you, in the features that you were adding to the tiny shelf, et cetera, were there some that appealed more to communities that were not necessarily white and, you know,
Sure.
20s?
Feedback from the shop is that the kids' books get snatched up instantly. And in creating the second design of the library, it was intentionally lowered to the ground so that kids could reach it. The first library, they can't reach it. So there's talk definitely of how can it become more kid-centric, because that's what people seem to be hungry for.
I think that something really interesting that came out in this presentation in terms of, you know, how to build your community was the making, and how that really came out for me when you were presenting, that the act of public making on the street was such a huge connector and brought so many people together, and it makes me think of like, it's like a mini event. Like, it's not the little good place, it's not a huge block party.
Right.
It's creating small moments of activity in which the community, and I think it's a strong argument for the littleness, the impact of little things.
Absolutely.
Hi. So I'm thinking about the small moments, and I'm thinking about how one of the wonderful things that New York City has is this dense gift in which these interactions can happen. And so I'm wondering, have you thought about, you've seen these pop up in other parts of the United States.
Absolutely.
Have you thought about, a really cool question would be like, how do you think about a less dense environment, or a place where people might interact through their cars or going in cars?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. In thinking about the urban context, I very much was comparing it to suburban residential context, where you see most of the examples that it's outside of someone's home and it's a picket fence and it's very fine and dandy, and that this was like, no, we're going to go to a place where you can't even drill into the ground. We had to come up with a solution to make way for the cement that was below it, that you wouldn't interfere with landlords' protocol. So yes, I think that in a more rural situation, it would get less foot traffic. That's what this brings to it. But the density also, I think, ups the stakes of the number of people that could do something to it as well.
I remember in your midterm you were talking about, we were discussing the idea of things like the block party and what it is, what can we learn or not from the desire of design designers to do something different all the time. So it was such a tight presentation, and the way you sort of looped through the iterations until you got to the library is sort of interesting. But at the same time, I wondered what you've learned about actually running with an idea that already exists, and just actually doing it and seeing what happens when you do it. So I just wondered, as a sort of lesson, what you would take away from seeing ideas that exist, like block parties or mini libraries, and running with those versus the designer's desire to always do something new and novel.
I have felt the pressure to do something new and novel, and grappling a lot in the beginning of what can I create, what can I add. It's all so difficult and uncomfortable, and was just given the suggestion of, well, try something that does work and then see what happens. So I think it's the maybe swallowing that pride and yes, let's do something and test it out in this context and then build off of that. So I think there's no right way, but it worked for me to capitalize on what is already successful.
And I think for all, since these presentations are clustered, that it's interesting theme running through all of them is like the sense of and importance of like, how do you own that this is a design project, or does that matter? Like, is our goal to prove that we have a role as designers, or is our goal to make a difference in that community? So
well, ultimately, when you're outside in the neighborhood, who gives a hoot that your title is designer?
Exactly.
My title in this project was neighbor, and that's what carried the weight for me.